Chapter 1: The weight of empty rooms. Mike Sewell loved the sound of movement. Forklifts backing up with their warning beeps. Conveyor belts humming. Radios crackling with half-heard conversations. The shuffle of boots across concrete floors. It was noise with purpose, and Mike thrived in it. He liked knowing that something depended on him, that the decisions he made mattered beyond his own head. That was the thing about his new job. District manager at 29. A title he still rolled around in his mouth like it might dissolve if he said it too often. It wasn't a desk job. It wasn't a corner office with a view. It was motion. Inspections, training sessions, emergency coverage when a plant ran short or a shipment went sideways. No 2 days were the same, and Mike loved that. What he didn't love was the way his apartment sounded when he got home. The door closed too loudly. The quiet rang afterward. His place was clean, modern, efficient. Everything his life looked like from the outside. A couch that hadn't molded to anyone else's shape. A dining table that stayed folded against the wall. A second pillow that existed purely out of habit. Mike dropped his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door and stood there longer than necessary, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, the echo of his own breathing. Lonely didn't scream. It whispered. He told himself, not for the first time, that this was temporary. That he'd dated before. That he wasn't broken. He'd just been focused. Career first had worked. Promotions didn't happen by accident. He'd earned every rung he climbed. Still, the silence followed him from room to room. He texted his sister out of reflex. Made it back. Plant visit went well. Megan replied almost immediately. Of course it did. You're incapable of doing things halfway. Mike smiled faintly and dropped onto the couch. Megan had always been like that. Direct, confident, convinced she knew how the world should work and mildly irritated when it didn't comply. She was 30 now, engaged, deep into wedding planning that involved color palettes and spring venues and opinions Mike did his best not to have. Their parents' divorce came up sometimes. Never gently. Mike had been a senior in high school when his mom filed. Megan was already gone, already building a life elsewhere. Mike remembered the way his dad packed. 2 suitcases, both old, both worn thin at the corners. 20 years of marriage reduced to what could fit in fabric and zippers. Their mother had been thorough, efficient, relentless. Their father had wanted it over. Mike remembered standing in the hallway, unsure whether to speak or stay invisible, watching his dad pause at the door. Not for long. Just enough to look back once, like a man memorizing a room he'd never enter again. After that, life filled the space where his father had been. College, work, promotions, 1,000 small reasons not to make a phone call. There was no dramatic falling out. No slammed doors or shouted accusations. Just time, piling up between them until reaching across it felt impossible. By the time Mike realized how completely his father had slipped out of his life, shame had already settled in. He didn't know what he feared more, that his father would hate him or that he wouldn't care at all. Megan saw it differently. If he really wanted to stay connected, she'd said once, sharp and certain, he would have tried harder. Mike didn't argue out loud, but the thought stuck in his chest. Communication worked both ways, didn't it? He wasn't innocent. He knew that, but neither was silence. The years passed. Father's Day reminders popped up on his phone and went unanswered. Birthdays came and went with vague discomfort and no action. Eventually, Mike accepted that he'd lost his father and that the blame didn't belong to just one person. Acceptance didn't make it hurt less. It just made it quieter. Which was how he found himself in a small-town diner 2 counties away from home, on the second day of a site visit, listening to a foreman rave about hamburgers. They're legendary, the man insisted as they slid into a booth. Slogans right there on the menu. If it's not messy, it can't be good. Mike laughed politely and scanned the room while they waited. Red vinyl stools lined the counter. A waitress with a practiced smile moved between tables. The place smelled like grease and onions and something comforting he couldn't name. His gaze drifted, casual and unfocused, until it wasn't. The man at the far end of the counter wasn't familiar in the way recognition usually worked. It wasn't a face he placed. It was posture. The slight forward lean. The way his shoulders carried weight that never seemed to come off, even when sitting still. Instinct hit before thought. Mike's breath stalled. Time slowed, stretched thin and fragile, as the man turned his head to speak to the waitress. Gray threaded through hair that had once been dark. Lines carved deep beside his mouth. Familiar hands wrapped around a coffee mug like it was something steady in an unsteady world. Mike's lungs forgot how to work. It was his father. Older, thinner, tired in a way that came from years, not days. A man shaped by responsibility and loss and time that didn't pause for anyone. Mike's first instinct was to leave. The fear came fast and sharp. He could pretend this hadn't happened. He could walk out, return to work, carry this moment like another quiet regret. His body turned slightly toward the door. Then his feet moved in the opposite direction. He didn't remember deciding. He just knew that suddenly he was standing behind his father. Heart pounding so loudly, he was sure the entire diner could hear it. Words crowded his throat and fled. Before his brain could catch up, he said the only one that mattered. Dad. The man's shoulders stiffened. Slowly, deliberately, he turned. Mike braced himself for anger, for hurt, for accusation, for anything that proved this moment mattered as much to the man in front of him as it did to Mike. What he saw instead was nothing. No flicker of emotion crossed his father's face. Just a brief assessment, a measured breath, then a nod. "You look good," his father said, voice steady, almost neutral. "What are you doing here?" The question landed between them, heavy and unresolved, as the smell of burgers and the noise of the diner carried on around them, unaware that something long broken had just cracked open. Chapter 2. If it's not messy. For a moment, Mike forgot how to sit. He stood there beside the counter, aware of the way people moved around him, the scrape of plates and the hiss of the grill, but none of it connected. His father's words, "You look good. What are you doing here?" hung between them like a test he hadn't studied for. "I'm working," Mike said finally, hating how thin it sounded. He gestured vaguely. "District inspections. Logistics company." His father nodded again, the motion small and economical, like he didn't want to waste effort on unnecessary movement. "That's so." "Yeah." Mike swallowed. I didn't know you lived around here." "I don't," his father said. "Not exactly." The waitress returned then, sliding a plate of fries toward the empty space beside him before realizing the seat was occupied by history. She glanced between them, eyebrows lifting just slightly. "Everything okay here?" she asked. His father looked up at her, expression smoothing into something neutral but polite. "Fine, Claire. Just ran into an old friend." The word old landed oddly. Mike resisted the urge to correct it. Claire smiled, clearly unconvinced but professional enough not to push. "Burger'll be up in a minute, Frank." Frank. Mike had forgotten how strange it felt to hear his father's name spoken by someone else. It sounded smaller somehow. Human. "Mind sitting?" his father asked, nodding toward the stool beside him. Mike took it before fear could change his mind. Up close, the years were impossible to ignore. His father's hands bore small scars Mike didn't recognize. The skin around his eyes creased deeply, not with laughter but with endurance. This wasn't the man who used to grill in the backyard on Sundays or coach from the sidelines. This was someone who had lived a whole life without him. "So," his father said, staring into his coffee. "District manager. That's good." Mike exhaled. "Yeah, I like it. Always liked staying busy. Guess I learned that somewhere." The corner of his father's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but it faded before Mike could be sure. Silence stretched, not hostile, not warm, just unpracticed. Claire returned with a burger the size of a small planet and set it down with a flourish. "Careful," she said lightly. "That one lives up to the slogan." She slid a napkin toward Mike as well, though he hadn't ordered anything yet. Her eyes lingered, curious but kind. "On the house," she added. "You look like you could use food." Mike blinked. Thank you." "No problem." She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to feel conspiratorial. "If it's not messy, it can't be good." His father snorted before he could stop himself. Claire's grin widened. "See? He agrees." She moved on, leaving behind grease-scented air and a strange sense of being noticed. Mike glanced sideways. "You come here a lot?" "Most days," his father said. "Cheap. Familiar. Do you work nearby?" "Factory outside town. Maintenance." Mike nodded, filing away the information like it might be useful later, even though he didn't know how. "I'm only here for the week." Another silence. Mike picked up the burger to give his hands something to do. The first bite was chaos, sauce down his wrist, onions threatening escape. He barely noticed. "I thought about calling," Mike said suddenly. His father looked at him then. Really looked, eyes sharp despite the years. "When?" "After college. Before that too, I guess." He wiped his hand on a napkin. "I didn't know what to say." "That makes two of us." Mike's chest tightened. "You could've." "I know," his father said, cutting him off gently. "I know what I could have done." The admission landed heavier than any accusation. "I didn't disappear because of you," his father continued. "I disappeared because I didn't know how to stay without breaking apart." Mike stared at him. "You didn't think I needed you? I thought you were better off without the mess." There it was. The same logic that had shaped so much of Mike's life. Avoid what hurts. Keep moving. "I didn't need perfect," Mike said quietly. "I just needed something." His father nodded once, jaw tight. "Yeah." Claire reappeared, refilling coffee without asking. "You two okay?" "Yeah," Mike said a beat too fast. She studied them for a second, then shrugged. "Let me know if you need anything." As she walked away, his father said, "She's nosy. Means well." Mike smiled faintly. "She seems nice." "She is." They finished eating in companionable quiet. When the check came, Mike reached for it out of instinct. His father pushed his hand back. "I've got it. I've got it," his father repeated, firmer this time. Mike let him. Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright, like the world hadn't gotten the memo that something significant had just shifted. "I'm staying at the Oakview," Mike said, unsure why. If you want to talk again." His father hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Then he nodded. Yeah, okay. They stood there awkwardly, neither quite ready to leave. Take care, kid, his father said at last. You too, Mike replied. As his father walked away, Mike felt something unfamiliar bloom beneath the ache. Possibility. Back inside, Claire caught his eye and raised an eyebrow. That looked heavy, she said. Mike huffed a quiet laugh. You could say that. Well, she slid a fresh napkin toward him. Come back if you need another burger. Or an excuse. Mike pocketed the napkin, grease-stained and imperfect. He had a feeling he'd be back. Chapter 3, Collisions. Mike told himself he was only stopping by the diner because it was convenient. The plant was 15 minutes away. The Oakview's continental breakfast had been aggressively beige. He had a full schedule and a stack of reports waiting in his laptop bag. Any reasonable person would have grabbed a coffee to go and headed straight to work. Instead, he found himself pulling into the diner's cracked parking lot at 7:42 a.m., heart beating a little faster than the situation warranted. Just coffee, he thought, and then I'll leave. The bell above the door announced him, bright and cheerful in a way that felt undeserved. Claire was already behind the counter, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, moving with the efficient confidence of someone who had memorized the rhythm of the place. She looked up automatically, and then smiled when she saw him. Well, she said, either this place is developing a very specific type, or you're back for more mess. Mike felt his mouth curve before he could stop it. Is it that obvious? You've got the look, she replied, grabbing a mug. Man who survived the burger and lived to tell the tale. Barely. She poured coffee and slid it toward him. Same table. He hesitated, glancing toward the end of the counter. He's not here, Claire said, not unkindly. If that's what you're checking. Mike stilled. I wasn't. She raised an eyebrow. Okay, I was, he admitted. She nodded once, like that told her everything she needed to know. He comes in later most days. Around 10. Good to know, Mike said, then immediately wondered why he'd said it at all. He took the stool anyway, wrapping his hands around the mug. The coffee was strong and tasted like something that had opinions. So, Claire said, leaning against the counter. You gonna tell me? Or should I keep guessing wildly? About yesterday. She tilted her head. That wasn't an old friend. That was complicated. Mike exhaled through his nose. You're perceptive. Occupational hazard. She shrugged. You see enough people, you get good at reading the pauses. He stared into his coffee. The surface trembled slightly, betraying his grip. He's my dad, Mike said. Claire didn't react right away. No gasp. No awkward sympathy face. Just a slow nod. Okay, she said. That makes sense. It does. Yeah. You both have the same pretending everything's fine while bracing for impact vibe. Mike laughed, surprised by it. That obvious, huh? Only if you're looking, she said lightly. Which I do. A lot. Silence settled, but it was different from the ones he was used to, less heavy, more patient. I didn't expect to see him, Mike said. It's been years. Did it go how you thought it would? He considered that. No, I don't know what I thought would happen. I guess something louder. Loud isn't always better, Claire said. Sometimes it's just messier. He glanced up at her. You really lean into the slogan. She grinned. It's a philosophy. The door chimed again, bringing in a rush of cold air and a couple of regulars who waved at Claire like she was part of the furniture, in the best way. She moved to greet them, calling orders from memory, then returned with a plate. Eat, she said, setting down toast and eggs. You look like someone who forgets to when his brain gets too loud. Mike blinked. I didn't order. On the house, she said again, tone firm. District manager or not, you don't get to skip breakfast in my diner. He smiled despite himself. You don't even know my name. She smirked. Yet. Mike. Claire. They shook hands across the counter, her grip warm and confident. Nice to officially meet you, Mike, she said. Try not to implode today. I'll do my best. Work passed in a blur. Mike caught himself replaying the morning in fragments. Claire's smile, her easy way of seeing without prying. The fact that she hadn't treated his family drama like a spectacle. By the time he returned to the diner that afternoon, he had stopped pretending it was accidental. This time, his father was there. Frank sat at the counter with his usual coffee, shoulders slightly hunched, gaze distant. When he noticed Mike, surprise flickered across his face, followed by something like relief. You stalking me now? Frank asked. Only a little, Mike replied, sliding onto the stool beside him. Claire said you come in around 10. Claire, passing by, pointed a finger at Mike. I said most days. Don't put your obsession on me. Frank raised an eyebrow. Claire. Long story, Mike said. Frank's mouth twitched again. A fraction longer this time. They talked more easily today. Small things. Work schedules. Weather. The way the town changed in summer. It wasn't deep, but it wasn't empty either. Each sentence felt like laying a plank across a gap. At one point, Frank said, Your sister still live out west? Yes, Mike said. She's getting married. Frank's hand tightened around his mug. That's so. She didn't know I'd see you? Mike added, unsure why he felt the need to defend himself. Frank nodded. Figures. Claire hovered nearby, pretending to wipe an already clean counter. When Frank left, she watched him go, then turned back to Mike. You okay? She asked. I think so, he said. Ask me again later. She leaned closer. You know, for someone who likes movement, you're very good at standing still when it counts. Mike blinked. Is that a compliment? Undecided, she said, smiling. But you came back. That counts for something. He hesitated. Would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime? Not here. Somewhere less observant. She laughed softly. Mike, I work in a diner. Observant is my default. But that's a yes? She considered him for a beat. Yeah, she said. That's a yes. As Mike left, the day felt different. Still complicated. Still uncertain. But no longer empty. Chapter 4, The Inheritance of Silence. Mike didn't tell his sister right away. It wasn't a decision so much as a delay that kept extending itself. There was always a reason. Another inspection, another late drive back to the Oakview, another evening where his brain felt too full to add one more fragile thing to it. He told himself he needed to understand what this reconnection meant before he tried to explain it to anyone else. The truth was simpler and harder. He was afraid Megan would take it away from him with her certainty. They spoke 3 nights after the diner, her voice bright through the phone, layered with the faint clatter of something being reorganized. I swear, she said, if one more person tells me sage green and eucalyptus are timeless, I'm canceling the whole thing and eloping. Mike smiled, pacing the hotel room. You'd still color coordinate the elopement. Obviously. She paused. You okay? You sound distracted. He stopped by the window, watching headlights slide past in the dark. I saw Dad. Silence followed, not empty, but dense. You what? I saw him, Mike repeated, steadying his voice. Here. By accident. When? A few days ago. And again yesterday. Megan exhaled sharply. You didn't tell me. I know. Why didn't you tell me? Mike closed his eyes. Because I knew how this would go. That's not fair, she said quickly. I deserve to know. You do, he agreed. I just didn't want commentary. There it was. The old fault line. Did he say anything? She asked. Yes. Did he apologize? Mike hesitated. Not exactly. Megan scoffed softly. Of course he didn't. He wasn't defensive either, Mike said. He's just tired. That's not an excuse. I know, Mike said, more sharply than he intended. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying it's true. She was quiet for a long moment. You always do this, she said finally. You fill in the blanks for people. You take responsibility that isn't yours. Mike leaned his forehead against the glass. You always assume I'm not taking enough. Because you never let yourself be angry, she shot back. You just manage it. The word stung because it was accurate. I'm not asking you to forgive him, Mike said. I'm not even sure what I'm doing yet. I just wanted you to know. Megan sighed, the sound threaded with something like worry. I spent years watching Mom fall apart because he walked away. I know. And you just run into him at a diner and suddenly he's, what? Redeemed. No, Mike said firmly. Human. That stopped her. Look, he continued, gentler now. You don't have to talk to him. You don't have to like that I am. This feels unfinished. Megan's voice softened. Just be careful, okay? I will. After they hung up, Mike sat on the edge of the bed, phone heavy in his hand. The conversation hadn't resolved anything, but it hadn't destroyed it either. That felt like progress. He saw his father the next morning. Frank was already at the diner when Mike arrived, hands wrapped around coffee, eyes fixed on the window. When Mike approached, Frank glanced up and nodded. Like this, somehow had become normal. You look tired, Frank said. Long call with my sister. Frank grunted. She always the talker. Always. They sat in companionable silence until Claire appeared, sliding a mug toward Mike without asking. You're becoming predictable, she said. Is that bad? Mike asked. For you, she smiled. Probably. Frank watched the exchange with mild curiosity. You two friends. Working on it, Claire said easily. Mike shot her a look. She winked and moved on. Frank stared into his coffee. Your sister mad? Concerned, Mike said. They blur sometimes. Frank nodded. She took the divorce harder. Mike glanced at him. You don't get to say that like you weren't part of it. Frank didn't bristle. Didn't deflect. He just sighed. I know. They talked longer today. About nothing that mattered and everything that did. Frank told him about the maintenance job, how he liked fixing things people overlooked. Mike told him about the district, the travel, the way he never quite unpacked. You afraid to settle? Frank asked. Mike considered it. I think I don't trust quiet. Frank's eyes flicked up, something like recognition passing between them. Claire watched from across the room, not listening. Mike was sure of that, but noticing. She had a way of cataloging people, of seeing patterns even when they tried to hide. Later, when Frank left, she took the stool beside Mike. "You're lighter today," she said. "I am. Yeah, still heavy. Just not sinking." He smiled. "You have a lot of opinions for someone who serves coffee." "Coffee's a gateway beverage," she said. "Leads to truth." He laughed. "I talked to my sister. And lived. Barely." She nudged his arm. "Families are weird. They hand you things you didn't ask for and expect you to know what to do with them. What if you don't? Then you improvise," she said. "Or you make a mess." Mike studied her. "You're very comfortable with messes." She shrugged. "I grew up in one." Something in her tone shifted, not dramatic, just honest. They sat with that for a moment. "Want to take a walk later?" she asked. "After my shift?" "Yeah," Mike said without hesitation. "I do." They walked that evening through the quiet streets, past closed shops and soft-lit windows. Claire talked about the diner, about wanting more someday but not rushing it. Mike listened, really listened, the way he'd been learning to. When they stopped beneath a street lamp, she looked at him. "You don't have to figure everything out at once," she said. "Just don't disappear." The words landed gently and decisively. "I won't," Mike said. For the first time in a long while, he believed it. Chapter 5, Spot Inspections. Mike's calendar filled itself without asking his permission. A dawn drive to the Northern Distribution Hub. A midday training session that ran long because someone had skipped a safety update. A late-night report that needed revising because the numbers didn't quite line up. He lived out of his suitcase that week, clothes folded and refolded with the muscle memory of someone who never fully unpacked. Normally, that kind of movement settled him. This time, it tugged. He found himself checking the clock more than usual, measuring time not by deadlines but by diner hours. Claire worked long shifts, and Mike learned the rhythm of them the way he learned plant schedules. When she'd be busiest, when she might have a spare moment to talk, when she'd finally get off her feet. They didn't see each other every day. Sometimes it was just a wave through the window. Sometimes a 5-minute conversation over coffee that had gone lukewarm. But the connection stayed, threaded through his days like a quiet current. They talked at night, too. Phone calls that started practical and drifted into something softer. "Tell me one thing that didn't go according to plan today," Claire said one evening. Mike smiled, staring at the hotel ceiling. "Only one." She laughed. "Okay, fine. Start with the least disastrous. Forklift operator named Dan tried to convince me that speed limits were a suggestion." "And were they?" "No," Mike said. "But he was very passionate. I like Dan already." Another night, Claire talked about the diner. The regular who tipped in lottery tickets. The couple who argued lovingly over pie flavors. The way the grill made everything smell like comfort and exhaustion all at once. "You ever think about leaving?" Mike asked. She paused. "Sometimes. But not to run. To choose." That distinction stayed with him. He saw his father less that week, not by design, just by circumstance. Frank still came to the diner most mornings, but Mike wasn't always there to catch him. When they did overlap, the conversations were steady, cautious, like men walking across thin ice that hadn't cracked yet. Then one afternoon, everything shifted. Mike was halfway through a site walkthrough when his phone buzzed. Claire's name lit up the screen. He stepped aside, answering immediately. "Hey, everything okay?" There was noise in the background, sharper than usual. "Mike," she said, voice tight. "Your dad, Frank," he collapsed. His heart dropped. "What?" "He's conscious," she said quickly. "But he got dizzy and went down. We called an ambulance. They're taking him to County General." Mike didn't remember the rest of the walkthrough. He remembered grabbing his keys. Remembered driving too fast and not caring. The roads blurred, his thoughts narrowing to a single point of fear he hadn't realized he was carrying. At the hospital, the air smelled sterile and thin. Frank lay on the bed, hooked up to monitors, looking smaller than Mike had ever seen him. When he noticed Mike, his brow furrowed. "You didn't have to come," Frank said. "Too bad," Mike replied, voice rough. "I'm here." The doctor explained it was dehydration and exhaustion compounded by untreated high blood pressure. "Not a heart attack. Not today. Not today," echoed in Mike's head like a warning. Claire hovered near the door, arms folded tightly. When their eyes met, relief flashed across her face. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Mike said. "Thank you for calling me." "Of course." Frank slept while Mike sat beside him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. The steady beep of the monitor anchored him. He realized suddenly and painfully how easily he could have missed this. How close he'd come to losing a man he'd just started to find again. When Frank woke, the room was dimmer, evening slipping in through the blinds. "You look like hell," Frank said. Mike huffed. "I've been told." Frank shifted, wincing slightly. "Didn't mean to scare anyone." "You didn't mean to take care of yourself either," Mike said, then winced. "Sorry." Frank sighed. "No, you're right." They sat in silence, heavier now, weighted by what might have happened. "I should have called you years ago," Frank said suddenly. Mike's breath caught. "I was stubborn," Frank continued. "Thought I was protecting you. Thought staying away was easier. For who? Mike asked quietly. Frank didn't answer right away. Then me. The honesty hurt and healed in equal measure. I was scared, Mike admitted. I didn't think I deserved to come back. Frank turned his head, meeting his eyes. You always did. The words lodged in Mike's chest, fragile and powerful. When Frank was discharged later that night, Claire insisted on driving them both home. She kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other tapping lightly to music only she could hear. Outside Frank's apartment, he paused. You staying? He asked Mike. Yeah, Mike said. For a bit. Frank nodded, then glanced at Claire. Thank you. She smiled. Make him drink water. I will, Mike promised. They walked Claire back to her car after. The night air was cool, quiet. You didn't have to do all that, Mike said. Yes, I did, she replied. That's what people do. He stopped beside her car, unsure how to fit everything he felt into words. You're allowed to lean, she said, reading him easily. You don't have to carry everything. He swallowed. I'm not very good at that. She stepped closer, resting her forehead briefly against his. Practice. The moment was simple. No grand declaration, just connection. As she drove away, Mike stood there, heart full and aching and alive. Tomorrow would bring more inspections, more travel, more mess. But tonight he stayed. Chapter 6. What was lost? Frank's apartment smelled like dust and instant coffee. It wasn't unpleasant, just bare, like a place designed for function, not comfort. The couch had springs that complained when Mike sat down. The walls were mostly undecorated, save for a crooked calendar from 2 years ago and a small framed photograph on the kitchen counter. Mike noticed the photo while Frank shuffled toward the sink. It was old, faded. A man in his 30s stood beside a teenage girl in a graduation cap. Megan, unmistakably, and a younger Mike half hidden behind her, awkward and unsure. Frank's arm rested lightly on Mike's shoulder, as if afraid of gripping too tightly. Mike picked it up before he could talk himself out of it. You kept this? He asked. Frank glanced over, paused, then nodded. Didn't have much else. Mike swallowed. You didn't try to take more? Frank turned on the tap, filling a glass. Your mother's lawyer made sure there wasn't much to argue about. That's not what I meant. Frank set the glass down slowly. I didn't fight, he said. I know. The admission didn't come with drama. It didn't sound like self-pity. It was just fact. Mike sat back, the photo heavy in his hands. Why? Frank leaned against the counter, rubbing at a spot near his temple. Because I was tired. Because I didn't know how to win without losing myself. And because I thought you'd be okay. Mike's throat tightened. We weren't. Frank nodded. I know that now. They sat with the truth of it. The air thick but not hostile. Mike noticed things he hadn't before. The way Frank's hands shook faintly when he lifted the glass. The way his breathing stayed shallow, guarded. You can't keep doing this alone, Mike said. Frank huffed softly. Been doing it a long time. That doesn't mean it's working. Frank met his eyes. You sound like your mother. Mike flinched, then shook his head. No. I sound like someone who almost lost you without ever really knowing you. That landed. Frank looked away first. I didn't think I was worth chasing, Frank said quietly. Mike stared at him. That was never your call to make. Silence followed, stretched but not brittle. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's television murmured. Later, after Frank fell asleep in the recliner despite Mike's protests, Mike stepped outside and called Claire. She answered on the second ring. Hey, I'm at my dad's, Mike said. He's okay, resting. I'm glad, she said softly. How are you? Mike leaned against the railing, night air cool against his skin. Confused, angry, sad. All of it. Sounds about right. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this, he admitted. I spent years pretending I didn't need answers. Now they're everywhere. You don't have to solve it tonight, Claire said. Just don't pretend it doesn't exist. He smiled faintly. You're good at this. At what? Seeing the thing underneath. She was quiet for a moment. That's because I know what it looks like when people refuse to. They talked until Frank stirred, and Mike promised to check in later. The next few days strained the careful balance Mike had been building. Work demanded his attention. An unexpected staffing issue at one plant. A shipment delay that rippled across 3 locations. His phone buzzed constantly. He slept lightly. His patience wore thin. Claire noticed. You're here, but you're not, she said one evening as they sat on the diner's back steps, sharing fries that had gone cold. That's new. Mike rubbed his hands together. I'm trying. I know, she said. But trying isn't the same as trusting. He looked at her, brow furrowed. Trusting what? That you don't have to shut down to get through this. The words hit close to home. I don't want to drag you into my family mess, Mike said. You didn't sign up for that. Claire scoffed lightly. I didn't sign up for perfection either. That's not what I meant. I know, she said. But you're pulling back. He hesitated, then admitted. I don't know how to be this person and still be available. Then learn, she said simply. The frustration flared before he could temper it. It's not that easy. No, she agreed. It's harder. They sat in silence, tension crackling between them. For the first time since they'd met, it felt fragile. Later that night, alone in his hotel room, Mike stared at the ceiling and felt the old instinct rise. The urge to compartmentalize, to manage, to retreat into competence where feelings couldn't follow. It would be easier. The next morning, Frank was worse. Not dramatically, no collapse, no ambulance, but slower, paler, breathing labored enough to make Mike insist on another doctor's visit. This time, Frank didn't argue. At the clinic, the doctor talked about long-term damage, about stress, about the consequences of ignoring warning signs for too long. You need support, she said, looking directly at Frank. Not just medication. Frank nodded, eyes downcast. Mike felt something shift inside him then. Not panic, not guilt, but resolve. Back at the apartment, Frank sat heavily on the couch. I should have done better, he said. Yes, Mike replied. But you can still do something. Frank looked up. Like what? Let me help, Mike said. Not because you failed. Because I'm here. Frank's eyes shone, just slightly. You don't owe me that. I know, Mike said. I want to. That night, Mike drove aimlessly for an hour before ending up outside Claire's place, a small apartment above a closed bookstore. He didn't plan a speech. He just knocked. When she opened the door, surprise flickered across her face, followed by concern. Hey, she said. What's wrong? Everything, Mike said honestly. And I don't want to do it alone. She stepped aside without hesitation. Then don't. Inside, he told her everything. About the photo, about the resentment and regret. About how scared he was of becoming someone who disappeared when things got hard. I don't want to repeat this, he said, voice rough. I don't want to wake up one day and realize I've left people behind because it was easier than staying. Claire listened without interrupting, her presence steady and grounding. When he finished, she took his hands. You're not him, she said. You're choosing differently. Even when it hurts. He exhaled shakily. I don't know how to be good at this. You don't have to be good, she said. Just honest. They stood there, close but not rushed, the moment quiet and real. Outside, the world kept moving. Inside, Mike stayed. Chapter 7, the mess worth making. The clinic parking lot was nearly empty, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel louder than it should. Mike leaned against his car, watching his father shuffle toward the passenger side, slower than yesterday, but steadier than he'd been the week before. Frank opened the door and paused. You don't have to keep doing this. Mike shut the door for him gently. I know. That wasn't a suggestion, Frank added, not unkindly. Mike met his eyes. Neither is this. Frank studied him for a long moment, then sighed. You always were stubborn. Learned it somewhere. That earned him a faint smile. They drove back to the apartment in comfortable quiet, the radio murmuring softly between them. Frank stared out the window, his reflection ghosting across the glass. Mike realized he'd stopped bracing for rejection sometime in the last few days. The fear was still there, but it no longer dictated his movements. Inside, Frank lowered himself onto the couch with a groan. Doctor says I should slow down. Mike raised an eyebrow. You planning on listening? Frank snorted. I didn't say that. Mike fetched a glass of water and handed it over. Frank took it without comment, which felt like a small victory. Your sister call? Frank asked after a moment. Yeah. And? She's processing. Frank nodded. That tracks. Mike hesitated, then said, she's getting married in the spring. I know, Frank said quietly. I saw it online. Mike blinked. You follow her? Frank shrugged. I didn't want to intrude. Just wanted to know how she was. The admission cracked something open in Mike's chest. She'd want to hear from you, Mike said carefully. Eventually, on her terms. Frank swallowed. Would she? I think so, Mike said. If you don't disappear again. Frank looked down at his hands. That's fair. They sat like that for a while, the space between them no longer a chasm but not yet a bridge. Something narrower, more fragile but real. Later that afternoon, Mike left his father resting and drove into town. He didn't go to the diner right away. Instead, he found himself walking aimlessly, thoughts looping, nerves tightening. Claire's words echoed in his head. Just don't disappear. He realized, with uncomfortable clarity, that disappearing didn't always mean leaving town or cutting contact. Sometimes it meant staying physically present while emotionally retreating. Managing instead of engaging. Keeping everything neat enough that no one could see the cracks. He stopped in front of the diner eventually, heart thudding. Inside, Claire was mid-shift, laughing with a customer as she refilled a mug. When she saw Mike, her smile softened, becoming something just for him. You look like someone about to say something important, she said, wiping her hands on a towel as she joined him. Is it that obvious? Extremely. He exhaled. Can we talk? Not here. She nodded without hesitation. Give me 10 minutes. They walked down the street to a small park, bare trees arching overhead, the air sharp with the promise of early spring. Claire perched on the edge of a low stone wall, watching him with quiet patience. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Mike said, hands shoved into his pockets. About my dad. About you. About the ways I avoid things that matter. Claire tilted her head. Sounds thrilling. He smiled faintly. I'm serious. I know, she said. Keep going. I realized I'm good at handling crises, he continued. I show up when things break. I just don't know how to stay when they're ongoing. Claire studied him, eyes steady. Staying is scarier. Yeah, Mike admitted. Because it means being seen over time. It means you don't get to be a hero for a moment and then leave. She nodded. So what are you saying? Mike took a breath, forcing himself not to rush. I'm saying I don't want to do that with you. I don't want to pull back just because things are complicated. Claire's expression softened, but she didn't interrupt. I don't know what this looks like yet, he said. I just know I want to be present, even when it's messy, especially then. She was quiet for a long beat. Thank you for saying that, she said finally. I was starting to wonder if I was imagining the distance. You weren't. She reached out, taking his hand. I don't need you to have it all figured out. I know. I just need you to keep choosing to stay, she said. Even when it's uncomfortable. He squeezed her hand. I can do that. She smiled, small but genuine. Good. They walked back to the diner together, fingers brushing, the simple contact grounding him. That evening, Mike called his sister again. I talked to Dad, he said when she answered. About the wedding. Megan sighed. You don't waste time. No, Mike said. I waste silence. She was quiet. What did he say? He knows he messed up, Mike said. He's not asking for forgiveness. Just a chance to not disappear again. Megan's voice wavered. I don't know if I'm ready. That's okay, Mike said. I just wanted you to know he cares. He always did. Badly, imperfectly, but genuinely. She exhaled slowly. I'll think about it. After they hung up, Mike felt something settle, not resolution but direction. Later that night, Claire and Mike sat on her couch, legs tangled, the TV playing something neither of them was watching. You did it, she said. Did what? You stayed, she replied. Today was hard. You didn't run. Mike leaned his head back, staring at the ceiling. I wanted to, for about 5 minutes. And then I didn't. She smiled. That's the part that counts. He turned to look at her. You're not scared. She shrugged. Of course I am. But fear doesn't get to decide everything. Mike leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers, the contact familiar now, grounding. I don't know how this ends, he said. Neither do I, she replied. But I know how it starts. He kissed her then, not rushed, not desperate, just present. Outside, the world stayed imperfect and unresolved. Inside, Mike made the mess worth making. Chapter 8. Spring invitations. Spring arrived quietly, like it didn't want to make promises it couldn't keep. The mornings softened first. Light lingered a little longer at the edges of the day. Snow receded into stubborn, dirty piles that everyone pretended not to see. Mike noticed the change not because he was particularly sentimental about seasons, but because his calendar finally slowed enough for him to feel it. He was back in his apartment more often now. The room still echoed, but the sound had changed. Claire's jacket hung over the back of a chair more days than not. There were 2 toothbrushes in the cup by the sink, mismatched and uncoordinated. Mike caught himself leaving lights on in rooms he wasn't using yet, the subconscious expectation of someone else moving through the space. He didn't correct it. Frank's health stabilized in increments, not leaps. Medication, short walks, fewer hours at work, more at home. Mike checked in every day, sometimes by phone, sometimes in person. They didn't force conversation. They didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. They talked about what was in front of them. It was enough. One afternoon, Mike sat at Frank's small kitchen table, paperwork spread between them, doctor's instructions, appointment reminders, a calendar that finally reflected something resembling intention. You don't have to manage this, Frank said, watching Mike write. I know, Mike replied. I want to. Frank studied him, then nodded. Okay. The word carried more weight than it should have. It was 2 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon that smelled faintly of rain and thawing earth, when Mike finally brought up the wedding. Megan's invitation sat unopened on the counter, cream-colored and understated, the kind of thing she'd chosen carefully after rejecting 50 other options. Mike turned it over in his hands, then looked at his father. She's getting married in May, Mike said. Frank didn't pretend he didn't know. I figured. She hasn't decided about you, Mike added carefully. Frank's jaw tightened, then relaxed. I wouldn't expect her to. Mike took a breath. But I think she should have the choice, not the absence. Frank leaned back, folding his arms. I don't want to cause problems. You won't, Mike said. You'll just exist. That's kind of the point. Frank huffed softly. You always did simplify things. I learned from watching you make them harder than they had to be. That earned him a look, half reproach, half pride. You think she'll want me there? Frank said. Not quite a question. I think she'll want to know you wanted to be Mike replied. The rest is up to her. Frank stared at the calendar for a long moment. If she says no, then you respect it, Mike said. And you don't disappear. Frank nodded once. I can do that. Mike slid the invitation across the table. I'm going to tell her you'd like to come, that you're not expecting forgiveness. Just a seat if she's willing. Frank's fingers hovered over the envelope, not touching it. Thank you. The call with Megan happened that night. She listened quietly as Mike explained. About Frank's health, about the conversations they'd been having, about the way their father had shown up without excuses or demands. When Mike finished, she didn't speak right away. I don't know if I'm ready to have him there, she said finally. I know, Mike replied. You don't have to decide right now. He hurt Mom, she said. He hurt us. Yes, Mike said. Both things can be true. She exhaled slowly. Does he expect something? No, Mike said. He just doesn't want to vanish again. Silence stretched across the line. I need time, Megan said. You have it. When they hung up, Mike felt the familiar itch of uncertainty. But it didn't spiral. He sat with it. Let it be incomplete. Claire found him on the couch, phone still in his hand. How'd it go? She asked, sitting beside him. Unresolved, Mike said. Which I'm learning is not the same thing as bad. She smiled. Look at you. Growing. Don't get used to it. She laughed, resting her head on his shoulder. Too late. The answer came a week later, in the form of a carefully worded text from Megan. He can come. No speeches. No expectations. He sits in the back. That's all I can offer right now. Mike stared at the screen, chest tight, then typed back. That's more than enough. When he told Frank, the older man closed his eyes and let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for years. I won't mess this up, Frank said. You don't have to be perfect, Mike replied. Just present. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, spring finally committing to itself. Mike stood in the mirror adjusting his tie for the third time while Claire watched from the bed, already dressed, calm in a way that steadied him. You look like you're about to negotiate a peace treaty, she said. Feels like it, he replied. She stood and crossed the room, fixing his tie with practiced ease. Whatever happens today, she said, it's not all on you. I know, Mike said. I just want it to be okay. She kissed him lightly. It can be imperfect and still be okay. The ceremony was held in a small garden space, chairs arranged beneath budding trees. Megan looked radiant, composed, and when she saw Mike, her smile softened into something real and familiar. Frank arrived quietly, just as agreed. He wore a simple suit, hands folded, posture respectful and restrained. He took his seat in the back without drawing attention, eyes fixed forward, expression unreadable. Mike noticed anyway. Throughout the ceremony, his awareness flickered between moments. The vows, the laughter, the way Megan's voice wavered just slightly when she said I do, and the steady presence of his father behind him. Not intruding, not hiding, existing. At the reception, Frank stayed near the edges, speaking only when spoken to. When Megan passed by, their eyes met. She hesitated, then nodded once. Frank nodded back. It wasn't reconciliation. It was acknowledgement. Mike felt something loosen inside him. Later, as the sun dipped low and the air filled with music and quiet joy, Claire slipped her hand into his. You okay? She asked. Yeah, Mike said, watching his sister laugh with her new husband, watching his father sit alone but not isolated. I think I am. She leaned into him. Good. Mike looked around, at the messy, imperfect gathering of people who had shaped him, hurt him, loved him in flawed ways, and realized something important. This wasn't closure. It was continuation. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Chapter 9. Full tables. The diner didn't change much after spring settled in. The same bell chimed when the door opened. The same vinyl stools squeaked when people shifted their weight. The slogan still hung above the grill in faded red letters. If it's not messy, it can't be good. Like a challenge instead of a warning. What changed was who sat where. Mike noticed it on a quiet Thursday afternoon, weeks after the wedding, when he slid onto his usual stool and realized there was no longer an end of the counter that felt off-limits. Frank sat 2 seats down, coffee steaming in front of him, posture easier than it had been months ago. He looked up when Mike arrived, nodding once, then pushing the sugar jar closer without comment. Claire caught Mike's eye from behind the counter and smiled. Not the curious smile she'd worn when she first met him, but something settled, familiar. Mike wrapped his hands around his mug and exhaled. Life hadn't snapped into place. It hadn't offered him a neat before and after. What it had done was widen, subtly but unmistakably, like a room that finally had all the lights on. Frank was still learning how to take up space. He didn't overstay conversations. He didn't demand forgiveness. At the diner, he listened more than he spoke. Sometimes Megan joined them when she was in town, sitting stiffly at first, then loosening by degrees. Their conversations were cautious, but real. They talked about her new job, about Frank's health, about neutral things that built a bridge plank by plank. No one pretended the past hadn't happened. They just stopped letting it dictate everything else. Mike's work stayed demanding. He still traveled, still lived partly out of a suitcase. But the movement no longer felt like avoidance. He called Claire when he was on the road, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to tell her about the weird little moments that made up his days. The forklift operator who insisted on naming his machine. The warehouse cat that refused to be relocated. The plant manager who baked brownies every Friday and guarded them like state secrets. Claire listened, laughed, asked questions. Sometimes she talked about the diner. Sometimes about the future. Ideas she let herself voice now, tentative but hopeful. A different role. Maybe management somewhere new. Maybe not. The point wasn't the decision. It was the possibility. You're not allergic to roots, she told him once, sitting cross-legged on his couch, takeout spread between them. You just don't like being trapped. Mike considered that. Is that a flaw? No, she said. It's just information. They learned each other slowly, deliberately. They argued once, really argued, about something small that turned out not to be small at all. Mike wanted to fix it immediately. Claire wanted space. Old instincts flared. He felt the familiar pull to manage, to smooth it over, to retreat into competence. Instead, he stayed. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't efficient. But when they talked again, honestly and without armor, something settled deeper between them. At the diner, tables filled and emptied in rhythms Mike came to know by heart. One afternoon, Claire slid into the seat beside him during a lull, chin propped on her hand. You know, she said, this place is different now. Mike glanced around. Same grease, same chairs. Yeah, she said. But the energy's changed. Frank looked up from his coffee. You saying the burgers got worse? Claire grinned. Never. She looked back at Mike. I think it's you. Mike blinked. Me? You show up, she said simply. You take up space. People follow that. Frank cleared his throat. He's always been like that. Mike looked at his father, surprised. Frank shrugged. Even when you didn't know it. The moment passed without ceremony, but Mike felt it lodge somewhere permanent. Later that evening, after the diner closed and the lights dimmed, Mike and Claire sat at a corner booth, hands wrapped around mugs that had gone cold. What do you want? Claire asked suddenly. Mike frowned. Right now or existentially? Let's say both, she said. He thought about it not in the abstract, not as a plan to optimize, but as a question that deserved patience. I want a life that doesn't require me to disappear to survive it, he said finally. I want work that challenges me and people who know me when I'm quiet. I want full tables. Claire smiled softly. That's a good answer. What about you? He asked. She traced the rim of her mug. I want to choose my life instead of inheriting it. I want something messy and honest and mine. He reached across the table, taking her hand. That sounds compatible. She squeezed his fingers. Good. The summer crept in gradually, days stretching longer, the world loosening around the edges. Frank's health improved enough that he started walking in the evenings, sometimes alone, sometimes with Mike. They didn't talk much during those walks. They didn't need to. One evening, as they sat on a bench watching the sky deepen toward dusk, Frank spoke without looking at him. I'm glad you didn't walk away in that diner. Mike swallowed. Me too. I wouldn't have blamed you if you had, Frank added. I know, Mike said. But I would've. Frank nodded, accepting that without argument. When Mike returned to the apartment later that night, Claire was there, curled on the couch with a book she wasn't reading. You look thoughtful, she said. Just grateful, he replied. She smiled, shifting to make room for him. He sat, their shoulders touching, the simple contact grounding. You know, she said lightly, your place doesn't sound lonely anymore. Mike listened. The refrigerator hummed. Car passed outside. Claire's breathing was steady beside him. No, he agreed. It doesn't. He thought of the version of himself who'd stood in his doorway months ago, measuring silence, mistaking emptiness for peace. He hadn't been wrong to build the life he had. He'd just been incomplete. Messy didn't mean broken. It meant shared. At the diner the next morning, the counter filled the way it always did. Coffee cups clinking, voices overlapping, life unfolding in small, ordinary ways. Mike slid onto his stool. Frank nodded. Claire poured coffee. The table was full, and for the first time Mike didn't feel the urge to leave. Chapter 10 Staying. The first real heat of summer arrived without asking permission. It settled into the city in layers. Warm sidewalks, open windows, the faint hum of air conditioners working harder than they wanted to. Mike noticed it most in the mornings, when sunlight stretched across the apartment earlier than he expected and Claire complained about the coffee cooling too fast. You know, she said one Saturday, squinting at her mug, this is what people mean when they talk about seasonal problems. Mike laughed, leaning against the counter. I thought seasonal problems were supposed to be worse. Give it time, she said. Summer hasn't revealed its flaws yet. He liked mornings like this, not because they were perfect, but because they were ordinary. No urgency, no crisis waiting to be solved, just shared space and the quiet confidence that neither of them was going anywhere afterward. Mike had learned something important in the months since the wedding. Staying didn't mean stagnation. It meant intention. Work still pulled him across the state. The district expanded, responsibilities multiplying in ways that would have thrilled the old version of himself without question. Now, he weighed things differently. He said no more often. He scheduled trips with margins instead of squeezing them into the tightest possible window. When he traveled, Claire walked him to the door. "Text me when you land," she said, every time. "I always do." "I know," she replied. "That's why I say it." Frank continued to improve. Not dramatically, not miraculously, but steadily. He took his medication. He walked. He listened even when it annoyed him. Sometimes he joined Mike and Claire for dinner at the diner after Claire's shift, sitting with a quiet dignity that no longer read as distance. Megan came to town in late June. She called Mike from the rental car. "I'm parked outside your place." "You're early," Mike said, startled. "I know," she replied. "Don't make it weird." Mike laughed and buzzed her in. Claire met her at the door with an easy smile, offering iced tea and zero expectations. Megan relaxed incrementally the way she always did, testing the ground before committing her weight. They talked about the wedding, about work, about nothing that felt sharp. Later, Megan asked, "Is Dad coming?" Mike nodded. "If you're okay with it." Megan hesitated, then sighed. "I think I am." Frank arrived an hour later, quiet and respectful, bringing a store-bought pie he clearly hadn't trusted himself to bake. The evening was cautious but civil. Then, unexpectedly, Megan asked him about the maintenance job. Frank answered. They talked. Not about the past, not yet, but about the present, which turned out to be a start. Afterward, when Megan hugged Mike goodbye, she lingered. "You did good," she said quietly. Mike shook his head. "We did." She smiled at that. Later that night, Mike and Claire sat on the balcony, feet propped on the railing, the city alive below them. "You ever think about how weird it is," Claire said, "that the thing you're best at, handling change, was the thing that scared you the most when it came to people?" Mike considered it. "I think I was afraid that if I stopped moving, I'd see what I was missing. And now I know what I'd lose if I left." She bumped her shoulder against his. "Good answer." He turned to her. "I've been thinking about something." She eyed him cautiously. "That sentence has potential." "The company wants me to take on another region," he said. "It would mean more travel, longer stretches away." Claire waited, letting him finish. "I said no," Mike continued. Her eyebrows lifted. "Just like that." "Not just like that," he said. "I thought about it. Hard. And I realized, I don't want a life I have to keep apologizing for." She studied his face, then nodded. "I don't want that either." They sat with the decision, the future open but not unanchored. Weeks later, the diner hosted a small celebration for its anniversary. Nothing fancy. Balloons. A handwritten sign. Regulars who pretended they weren't sentimental. Claire stood behind the counter, flushed and happy, accepting congratulations like someone who finally believed she deserved them. Mike watched her from his stool, Frank beside him, both of them quietly proud. "You did good," Frank said, echoing Megan's words from earlier. Mike glanced at him. "We did." Frank smiled, really smiled this time. When the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, Claire slid into the booth across from Mike. "Walk me home?" she asked. "Always." They stepped into the warm night, the city softer now, edges blurred by humidity and contentment. Halfway down the block, Claire stopped. "Hey," she said. He turned. "Yeah." She took a breath, not nervous, just deliberate. "I don't know what the long term looks like. I don't need promises. I just want to know that when things get hard, when life gets loud, you won't vanish." Mike didn't rush his answer. He didn't dramatize it either. "I won't," he said. "Not because it's easy, because it matters." She smiled, eyes bright. "Good." They continued walking, hands brushing, steps in sync. Later, as Mike lay awake beside her, listening to the city breathe, he thought about the diner that started it all. About instinct, about fear, about the moment he chose not to leave. Life hadn't become quieter. It had become fuller. And for the first time, Mike Sewell wasn't measuring silence. He was listening to what remained and choosing to stay.